Okay. It looks like I am live. I will have the chat open on the off chance that anybody shows up and wants to ask questions. Otherwise, just leave a question in the comments if you had any. Okay. Looks like so here we go. Now, I could say a whole lot. I could spend a whole long time saying a whole lot about the history of the Rosary. And most people, when they talk about the Rosary, oh, by the way, I apologize for the less than aesthetically pleasing background. After the morning live stream, I decided that I should probably move to a location where we're not going to be disturbed by an emotionally needy multi-poo. So, anyway, I am here today to start talking about the Rosary, which is a really big topic. And usually, when people start doing a survey of the Rosary, they talk about the history of the Rosary, which takes you back to like the Dominicans in like the 13th and 14th centuries, which is important and that's part of the story. And we'll get to that. But I want to start with the modern world because one thing that I've noticed is that, like, people tend to forget that the Catholic Church, hasn't been frozen like a bug in amber since like the Middle Ages or the Renaissance or the 19th century or wherever you want to start. People sometimes say that evangelicals view Orthodox and Hasidic Jews as being sort of like Tolkien elves. Sometimes I feel like they think that Catholics are like the Uruk-hai. Um, so I'm sorry, I'm thirsty. I've been talking a lot today, but I've needed to talk a lot today. So, I'm going to start with sort of just a broad baseline overview of the Rosary in the modern world, understanding that people can and have and will write entire books and monographs about just one aspect of the Rosary. But this is like kind of just the basic base level broadline overview of how the Rosary functions in the modern world. Now, if you are not, I'm going to be doing a little bit of show and tell. If you are not familiar with a rosary, this is what one looks like. This is the extremely cheapy model. I don't know how much one like this would cost because this is the kind of cheap plastic rosary that gets given away at giveaway tables at Catholic events, or a lot of Catholic churches. Right when you come into the entrance, have basically a sharing table set up where people will purchase or make um, inexpensive religious items and will just set them out there for other people to take and use. It's a really nice way of building community. And it's kind of one of those like, you're a Catholic, you need a rosary. If you do not have a rosary, one will be provided to you. And this rosary works just as well as a more fancy and expensive rosary. And like, you can order these in bulk. This probably costs like 50 cents. It could have been made in a factory. It could also, someone could also have bought all of the components and sat down and just made them as a hobby. There are a shocking number of Catholics who enjoy making rosaries and chaplets as a hobby. Um, this is $1.50 of materials and a little bit of labor, and it makes a perfectly nice rosary. This is the low end. I can't show you a high-end rosary because the really high-end rosaries can cost hundreds of dollars. Like made out of, silver, precious metals, precious stones. Therefore, if you really want to splash out, most people don't do that. Most people just, get something that's pretty that speaks to them if they're into praying the rosary. And, people will sort of just select it basically on like aesthetic preferences and also spiritual preferences. What do I mean by that? Let me explain. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to go through the anatomy of the rosary. And as I go through the anatomy, I'm going to point out which parts are customizable and changeable and which parts are not. What cannot change and will not ever change and has not changed since the 16th century, because in the 16th century, the drop got added. All you need to know for the purpose is how and why and when and where it came from. We'll get into it in another episode. The point is, you have the rosary. So you have a cross, which can be any kind of cross. It doesn't necessarily have to be a crucifix, but it usually is. Then you have another bead on which one says an Our Father. Then you have three more beads that are the Hail Marys, and then you have the first Our Father. Very technically, the drop is optional, but it's not really optional anymore. It has it like in the 20th century and the 21st century, the whole like if you want a rosary, you've got the whole thing. Then you have another Our Father. Now you have the central medal. The central medal is extremely variable. This one, I'll try to hold it up to my camera, has a nice little picture of the Virgin Mary. This is actually a reliquary rosary because you can see that the little brown circle right there is actually a little piece of epoxy. In an earlier time period, it probably would have been glass, in which is set soil from Jerusalem. And in fact, it says Tierra Jerusalem on the metal, so you know what it is. So, this is, dirt from Jerusalem. And I'm sure there's somebody with a bucket and a bunch of epoxy who's making some kind of a living manufacturing little um, epoxy Tierra Jerusalem things to put in rosaries. So anyway, then you have more beads. The red ones will be Hail Marys. The white ones, which in this case it's red and white so that there's a visual contrast. If you noticed on this rosary, which is black, you have just an extra little piece of the string there. And the reason for that is just so that as when you hit, it'll be either a different bead or there will be a break, so that when you hit the Our Father bead, you know that you're switching, it's breaking up your it's breaking up your Hail Marys. So basically when you say the rosary, you're saying 50 Hail Marys plus the three Hail Marys down here. And then you're saying, let's count together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Our Fathers, and then one extra Our Father down here. Like if you want to be extremely technical, a whole rosary is praying this whole thing 3 times for reasons I'll get into in a subsequent video. However, in the modern world, most people, when they say they're praying their rosary, what they actually mean is that they're praying this around. They're praying 5 decades of the rosary. Or sometimes people will pray 10 decades of the rosary. Let's see, do I have a tenor that I can reach right now? No, I do not. Okay. Do I have, no, I don't have a tenor. Okay, I will include tenors, I guess, in the next episode. There's a nice little one in the cover photo for this. Okay, so you're praying. So you're praying all of this. Now, it takes, and I've timed this, between 12 and 15 minutes to pray 5 decades of the Rosary aloud. So that means that if you're a Catholic and you're praying the Rosary regularly, that gets you a solid 15 minutes to an hour of mindfulness meditation with repetitive chanting every single day, which is, demonstrably good for your mental health. And that I think is a lot of the reason why a lot of Catholics are into it. Now, the other thing it does is, as anyone who has ever, said a word until it starts to lose all meaning, um, after a certain number of repetitions, you kind of need something to break it up just to help you keep a little bit more focus. And that's basically what the Our Fathers do. They break up the repetition so that you are um, so that you're meditating, but then you also have a stop, a pause. So it's not just repetition, repetition, repetition. A lot of some Protestants that are used to spontaneous prayer will call this vain repetition, but it's not really vain because it's getting you into a calm, receptive mental state, which a lot of people find extremely helpful. Now, okay, I've talked about praying the rosary. What does that look like? Okay, so if you are just doing the most basic version of the rosary, which is the thing that most people learn when they're little kids, you will say the apostle, and this is part of the reason why I think the rosary has been so helpful, is that not only is it a meditation tool, in a lot of ways, it is sort of a and this is something that I want to thank Dr. Justin Sledge for introducing me to the concept of spiritual technology. Because what the Rosary has done is it's given Catholics a completely acceptable, um, com customizable, variable way of praying that reaffirms their religious beliefs and their religious identity. And for a lot of people, that's really useful. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so the most basic form. You start out by holding the cross and saying the Apostles' Creed. If you don't know what that is, just Google it, okay? Then you say your Our Father, you say your Hail Marys, you say your other Our Father, and you keep going all the way around. Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Our Father, and so on and so forth until you get back down to the middle where you will pray some other kind of prayer, usually Hail Holy Queen. So that is the most basic form. Well, suppose that somebody wants to go a little bit beyond the basics. Well, there's ways to do that too. One of the ways is, and I'm going to switch to a different rosary. One of the ways is that when you get to the chain, um, or the point where there's like a switch in the beads or whatever, you hold on to the chain and say a glory be. And you also say the Fatima prayer. Now, the Fatima prayer is a prayer that the three shepherd children who saw a series of apparitions of the Virgin Mary in Fatima, Portugal in the early part of the 20th century. That was what they reported. People believe it. I don't know. I wasn't there. Which is, oh my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. And people will pray that either after the Glory Be, or sometimes people will do an Our Father, will do a Glory Be, an Our Father, and an Oh My Jesus. And then you say the Hail Marys. So that's another way of customizing it to add in extra prayers and kind of, take care of extra needs that the person feels like they have. Also, a lot of Catholics, especially, they know that a lot of Protestants kind of roll their eyes at the Hail Mary, eventually start to think, what, the Rosary is like a whole lot of Mary. And we really should throw in a little bit more God and a little bit more Jesus. So that's a lot of times when the Glory Be and the Oh My Jesus will come in. Now, um, I just now I now, but that's not the only way to pray the Rosary. The other way to pray the Rosary is, oh dear, this is one of the things about rosaries, is that they frequently, when they're made of metal, they will sometimes come apart. And yeah, this is the best I can do until I have pliers. Okay, now this rosary is a little bit different. This one has a important catechetic, has an important function, catechetic. I can talk, really. It has an important function in catechesis, in that this helps you know the mysteries of the rosary. Now, the mysteries of the rosary, it sounds super impressive. Basically, the way to think about it are cutscenes, right? So it's like, basically, this is giving you a highlight montage of Jesus's life using and this is the really important part, mainly using the Virgin Mary essentially as the point of view character, that you're imagining as, like, you're sort of imagining, okay, I'm seeing what's happening to Jesus from his mom's perspective. So that creates this, like, very intense identification with the Virgin Mary and also with Jesus. A phrase that's often used for this kind of thing is, to Jesus through Mary. So the mysteries of the Rosary will be prayed on certain days. Um, Now, there are 4 sets of mysteries. They are and I'll have a separate video that really gets into the mysteries of the Rosary and their history and how that works. But for now, we're just surface level. Okay, so you have the joyful mysteries, the sorrowful mysteries, the glorious mysteries, and the mysteries of light, or the luminous mysteries. Um, and basically, and I'm just going to go over the joyful mysteries today. Just as an example, each mystery of the Rosary will get its own little episode, but basically, by giving people, okay, there's a specific day, or like during Lent, people will pray the sorrowful mysteries, things like that. It basically gives people a way of understanding and focusing their prayer life. And also, when you're praying, it tells you, okay, what should I be thinking about? What should I be meditating about? Oh, yeah. Um, let's, this is what we're going to be thinking about. So let's see, what day of the week is it today? Today is Tuesday. Yeah, okay, so actually let's go with the sorrowful mysteries. Okay, because it's Tuesday. Okay, now this is really cool. I don't, here we go. Okay. So I don't know if you can quite see that, but the beads have, these are metal beads, and they have the mystery and the day of the week stamped into them. And then on the excuse me. And then on each potter bead, it's called a potter bead because of in Latin, the Our Father starts out with Pater Noster, just like the smaller beads will be called Aves because Ave because the Hail Mary prayer in Latin starts out with Ave Maria. So those beads are Aves. Now, you start out with the first sorrowful mystery, which, if you can see right there, is the agony in the garden. So, this is the Garden of Gethsemane. So, and this is the one time where it actually matters which direction you're praying your rosary. So then going around to the next one, we have the scourging at the pillar. Let's see. Then you have the crowning with thorns. The carrying of the cross, the crucifixion, and then the crucifixion is the fifth one. So it's basically focusing on essentially Holy Week, right? So when you're in Lent or when you're in Holy Week and you're praying the sorrowful mysteries on Sunday, it's kind of on Sundays and then on Tuesdays as well. It basically gives you a moment where, oh yeah, sorry, the sorrowful mysteries are Tuesdays and Fridays. I'll talk a little bit about the luminous mysteries, which are a really new addition and kind of, in my opinion, sort of the luminous mysteries kind of mess up the nice little flow in ways that I'll talk about in a second. But the if you, at least if you're praying the rosary all through the week, it messes up the flow. So you can see you have this sort of nice little summary of the passion, death, and the passion and death of Jesus, and then the glorious mysteries. You get the resurrection. So you've got joyful mysteries, which is basically the Annunciation to the the finding of Jesus in the temple. Then you've got the then you have the sorrowful mysteries, which start out with the agony in the garden and end up with the crucifixion. And then you have the luminous mysteries, which mainly relate to Jesus's ministry. And the luminous mysteries start out with the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist and end up with end up with the Last Supper. So essentially, you have one that's focused on Jesus's childhood, one that's focused on Jesus's suffering, and then one that is focused on Jesus's ministry, and one that's focused on Jesus's resurrection. The luminous mysteries got added in later, which is why they're on Thursday, even though it kind of like breaks up because originally it was birth, death, resurrection. Now it's birth, but by throwing it in on Friday, you have basically joyful on Monday, sorrowful on Tuesday, glorious on Wednesday, but then on Thursday, you go backwards and pray the mysteries of light, which is fine, but anybody at the Vatican, I have notes. If you're taking notes, I would strongly suggest doing joyful on Monday, sorrowful on Tuesday, light on Wednesday, and then glorious on Thursday. And then figuring out a way to start over that doesn't involve praying, that that doesn't involve praying sorrowful mysteries on that doesn't involve playing joyous mysteries on Friday, which I think was probably the reason why they just opted for Thursday, because otherwise you're praying sorrowful on Friday, because Friday is the day that Jesus was crucified, and it's important to keep that as well. Um, I don't have a better solution, but that's what I personally do for my own personal devotion. Is I have just like a little like Monday through Thursday thing, if I'm praying with mysteries. And so the because the praying with the mysteries, if you're doing that consistently, it means that once a day or once a week, you are focusing on the scriptural texts, but you're not focusing on exactly just the words of the text. You're using the words of the text, and you're using meditation to allow you to have an effective emotional experience that allows people to feel closer, um, to God, and makes them, help understand things a little bit better. So, that's kind of what's going on with the rosary at like 100,000 feet level. Um, Now, one last thing, because somebody is going to ask this. Oh, I should probably mention first, what do you put your rosary, how do you carry your rosary around? Like, what do people do with it? Well, some people will wear it around their neck, which was something that was for American Catholics in the post-Vatican II era, was something like everybody had a Catholic grandma who told them, don't wear your rosary around your neck. It's not a necklace. Well, people have been wearing rosaries around their neck for a long time. Sometimes people do. Sometimes people will just kind of wrap it around their wrist, hold it in their hands. And if you're carrying it in your purse or a pocket, some people will have nifty little rosary pouches like this. This is a monogram of the Virgin Mary. And then we have a nice little packs with an Alpha and Omega. This is another one. It's just a little zipper pouch. And then you can also get these nifty little hard metal ones. This one has Our Lady of Guadalupe on it. Yes, Our Lady of Guadalupe has merch. So much merch. Oh my gosh. Actually, this green rosary that I have is partly an Our Lady of Guadalupe rosary. It has Our Lady of Guadalupe on one side, and then it has the Divine Mercy icon, which we'll be talking about next week, because this Sunday is Divine Mercy Sunday. So the Tuesday afternoon stream is going to be about specifically the Divine Mercy, its iconography, where it came from, all that kind of stuff. So that'll be fun too. The Divine Mercy Chaplet is actually prayed on a standard rosary, but that's a whole nother discussion. So so that's the other thing, is like this has Our Lady of Guadalupe beads because I have a devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe. So that was what I chose. Other people will choose different things. Or, for example, this rosary that has the mysteries on it also has a little medal. If I had it upside down, also has a little medal of depicting the Virgin Mary at Fatima. You can tell it's the Virgin Mary at Fatima because it's the Virgin Mary, and there's like three little tiny kneeling people. Well, they're little tiny because they were small children. So, so anyway, the point, you can kind of see just from my little representative sampling, that there is a lot of variation and customization that goes into the rosary, because the rosary is considered a sacramental. A sacramental is something that basically points to the seven sacraments and is, in some sense special and should be treated with respect. But on the other hand, it's not like sacred, sacred. It's not like a relic. It's not like the host. It's not one of those things. So there's plenty of room for flexibility and personalization as long as you keep with the cycle of the drop, the Our Fathers, and the Hail Marys, all those together. So in a lot of ways, the Rosary is sort of, it's a recipe. It's jazz. You have structure, you have material and cultural limitations, but at the same time, you can play with it a little bit and you can make it your own, and that can be really useful. Um, Before I close, I'm going to answer the question that a lot of people ask a lot, which is, can I, a Protestant, pray the Rosary? From a Catholic point of view, yes. The Rosary is considered open practice, which means that as long as you're a Christian who can, without crossing their fingers, say the Nicene Creed, um, doesn't mind leaving the doxology, that's the ending of the Our Father that Protestants use all the time and Catholics only use at Mass. Or um and if you can stand to pray that many Hail Marys, which some Anglicans and Episcopalians, even a few Lutherans do, um you know if you feel like you can pray the Rosary, from a Catholic perspective, this is open practice. There's no problem with praying the Rosary. The only hazard from a Catholic point of view is that people who start praying the Rosary tend to become Catholic. Probably because, and again, it's the whole, it's the affective relationship with Mary. It's seeing Mary as a way to it's seeing Mary as a way to understand her son, right? But, once you kind of get into that mindset, it makes Catholicism seem that much more appealing, which is something that, you know, is part of the reason why Catholics give rosaries away, is that it helps people get in, it helps people stay in, and it helps people who need to develop a relationship with Mary to develop a relationship with Mary. And it does all of those things in just, this little easy piece of handheld technology, which, let us not forget, there's the sound. Here's your Rosary ASMR. Yeah. You've got the sound of the beads. You've got the sound of the beads as you're fingering them. Yes. Catholics say that you finger the beads of the Rosary. One of the ways that you find out how Catholic brained you are is the day that you say, so and so was fingering the beads on their Rosary, and it doesn't immediately sound dirty. In the same way that I have a four-way medal, and not for well, okay, it is for the reason you think, but it's not that reason. Um, so yeah, and yes, we will be discussing Catholic religious medals um in another episode. But, so um you have the tactile experience of touching the beads, of feeling the way that they move through your fingers, and you have little round faceted beads, and then you hit a flat round bead and it changes your prayers. You have potentially the things that you're meditating on. Um, Sometimes people, if they have a particular problem that they're trying to think of, they will, offer it up, and kind of meditate on that and add it to their prayers. Um, and then, you have the tactile experience. You have the experience of, just looking at the rosary, like, which, personally, this is my personal collection. I think I use these. I think they're pretty. I like them. They make me happy, and I have a good friend who makes rosaries, so I'm really lucky because I can get, you know, kind of anything I want if I just like give him beads. It's awesome. I love it. I am such a goblin. When it comes to rosaries, I am a complete goblin. I want to have like a rosary for like every occasion because, obviously your ordinary time rosary is not something that you can use during Pentecost or Lent. Obviously. Obviously. It is not obvious. I'm just a gremlin. Um, because again, each liturgical season has its own color, which I'll also get to in a subsequent episode. But the point is that, it gives people an excuse to collect things. It gives you, if you need to buy a present for somebody, and especially if they've just had a, if they've had a baptism, if they've had a first communion, if they've had a confirmation, if they've gotten married, basically any life event, a rosary is an appropriate and appreciated gift if the person you're giving it to is Catholic. And that's helpful because, it's always nice to be able to buy people a present. Oh, I should also mention, when do Catholics pray the rosary? Because that's important too. Basically, Catholics pray the rosary anytime we darn well feel like it. um, you will see people, sitting on public transportation. You will, people will pray the rosary at home. Sometimes people will pray the rosary just if they're waiting around and need something to do with their hands and to take their mind off things. For example, at the most recent papal conclave, when Pope Leo was elected, um, the only outside item, no cell phones, no electronic devices of any kind, no paper, no pens, nada. The only thing that the prelates were allowed to bring in with them were like were you could but you could bring in your rosary. Also, Cardinal Tagle apparently smuggled in some well, reports vary if they were hard candies or cough drops, but Cardinal Tagle smuggled them into. But everybody had their rosary. And while they were waiting there for the votes to be counted, people were just there praying their rosary because it gives you something to do. Um, People will also pray the rosary either before or after Mass, either as something to get your mind into things or as something that will get your or something to just kind of bring you down, reconnect you when the mass is over. Typically in a Catholic church, for like between 15 minutes and a half hour after services, the church will just be kind of there and open, and people will kind of come in and out and pray. It's generally understood that you should clear out in time, that they have time to get ready for the next mass, but there's usually a little bit of a break between there. People will sometimes pray the rosary during mass. Especially people will get like a little, like what's called a 1 decade rosary or a tenor, which is basically this much, except there will be a cross and another and a religious medal at the end instead of a um, instead of the whole big rosary. Uh, 1 decades are good because you can just put them in your pocket easily. A lot of people will pray like 1 or 2 decades of the rosary after they receive communion, or while people are, or if they're not receiving communion that day, which we'll get into on our Eucharist live stream next week, um, will um, by taking the Eucharist, by receiving the Eucharist, I should say, it's a moment that people like to take a minute to kind of just pray and think and meditate. So a lot of people will choose to pray, um, you know, 1 or 2 decades of the rosary while that's going on, if they don't choose to focus on their own private petitions at that time. So I hope that I've helped you understand the utility of the rosary as a piece of spiritual technology that really helps Catholics stay grounded, stay focused, and it gives everybody this kind of common devotion that at this point, pretty much every Catholic everywhere in the world um, has prayed, will pray, or is going to pray a rosary. Oh, where else do we pray the rosary? I didn't even finish that. There's so many places. Okay. So people are not usually praying the rosary during Mass. The only time that that will happen is if you have a priest who, like, for example, is like me and kind of rambles and repeats themselves a lot. And sometimes you pray the rosary so that you're being holy, but you're also kind of zoning out just a little bit because, Father Mike has made the same point like 3 different times using slightly different language, and you understood him the first time. Or, if the priest is delivering a homily that maybe involves some stuff that you don't quite agree with the priest about, which does happen. Sometimes people will kind of like sit there and pray the rosary during the homily as a tool to like maintain to maintain their mindset, to maintain their spiritual calm, right? Because you don't want to get mad at the priest during mass, even if, you might have to send him a sternly worded email or say something to him after Mass. Um, and I would like to say for the record that as long as you approach them as a good faith interlocutor and, are asking honest questions, most, and, try not to be completely offensive. Um, most priests are like completely willing to educate you or discuss just about any topic. And most of them are pretty much unoffendable and unshockable. Yeah, there are some jerk priests out there, but there's people who are bad at any job, and they really try. So, if you have any questions about the rosary, ask me, ask your priest, do some Googling, talk to your Catholic friends, whatever. But I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has been informative. And